We're live now. Most welcome to Sangam Talks and Dr. Kathirasan, who's our first time speaker here. Very, very honored to have you over here. We came across your book some time ago, 40 Steps to Liberation. Very intriguing title, especially for the spiritual seekers or those on the Advaita path. So, Dr. Kathirasan K had his tutelage with Swami Satprakashananda Saraswati, who himself was a disciple of Pujya Swami Dayanand Saraswati. He studied the subject of Advaita Vedanta meticulously under Swamiji's guidance for several years before beginning to teach this knowledge to serious seekers. His book, 40 Steps to Liberation, they say, is a transformative guide that unravels the intricacies of Sadhana Panchakam by Adi Shankaracharya. So, Kathirasan ji, I welcome you to stage.
Thank you, Ji. Thanks for welcoming me. It's a pleasure to be here. All right. Namaste to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And today I'm going to talk about the text which I had commented, which is Sadhana Panchakam. And I have a deck of slides that I'm going to use to present some unique features about the text. Okay, Aparna ji, you can share the slide into the room if you could. Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, so as you can see today, as I've mentioned, we're going to look at this very interesting text by Adi Shankara, which is called Sadhana Panchakam. This particular text is very meaningful for many reasons, but one particular reason is that I learned this particular text with my teacher as one of the first few Advaita Vedanta texts, and it continues to be something that is very special to me. When I first learned this text from with my teacher, it was, I would say that at that time, I had a good appreciation of this text, but it became deeper as time went on. And when I started to study this text again, and I also when I taught this text to people in the past, it continues to allow me to discover deeper aspects of the text. So today I'm going to now talk about some of the unique features of this particular text. So let's look at what is Sadhana Panchakam. All right, as an introduction. Now, this particular text, the authorship is attributed to Adi Shankaracharya. And as many of you may know who Adi Shankara is, for those of you who may not know who he is basically a very important teacher in the tradition of the Upanishads. And he was also very much responsible for organizing the teaching tradition of Vedanta, especially, or rather specifically, Advaita Vedanta. So this particular text is attributed to his pen. Now, the other interesting thing is this particular text is only 5 verses, right? Just 5 verses in total. However, though it has 5 verses, within those 5 verses, you find 40 sadhanas. Those of you who may not be familiar with the term sadhana literally means practice or spiritual practice. So, for example, meditation is a sadhana. Maybe doing a puja is sadhana. If you're chanting, it is also sadhana. So, in this particular text, you find 40 sadhanas in total in these 5 verses. So, if you do your calculation, you would see that in each verse there are 8 sadhanas. So, therefore, in total there are 40 sadhanas in 5 verses. Now, to appreciate this text, there is a very, very common method used, which is called the Anubandha Chatushtaya, which is the fourfold considerations. If we use the fourfold considerations, we can further appreciate perhaps what is this text and who is it for, and what is the purpose, and what's the context in that sense. So, who is the qualified student for this particular text? It is seen that it is a seeker of liberation. I'll talk about liberation in a while, what it means, at least within the tradition of Advaita Vedanta or Vedanta. So a seeker of liberation is considered to be the qualified student for learning this text. As some of you may know, all of the texts in the Vedic tradition usually identify who the qualified student is. so that the teacher is actually, or the author is actually writing or composing this work for that particular target audience. So the target audience for this text is a seeker of liberation. So in Sanskrit, it's called a mumukshu. All right, so this is the target audience. Now, what is the subject matter, the Vishaya? It is a method to liberation. So what is unique about this text is that it unfolds the method. What is the method to get there? It is like, imagine you want to go to a particular destination. Now, how do you get there? You take a map and then you plot the path to the destination. So in the same way, this particular text provides that method. And that method is the 40 sadhanas. What is the purpose, the prayojana? The purpose is achieving liberation. That is the purpose. That is the only purpose of this particular text, not for anything else. Now, what is the relationship between these three? Basically, if we were to put the first three considerations together, what we see now is a seeker who follows this method will achieve liberation. So now you can see that this particular text, Sadhana Panchakam, is primarily for a seeker who wants to use a method to achieve liberation. Now, next, let's talk about what is liberation. Now, this is very important because I've used that word a couple of times, and also the title of the book is also 40 Steps to Liberation. So it's very important for us to unpack what it is. So instead of me trying to come up with a definition or a description of liberation, I'm going to use the definition and description provided by Adi Shankara. So Adi Shankara provides this very beautiful description of liberation in his Brahma Sutra Bhashya. You can see that on the bottom right of the slide, if you see a small note, now that is basically the source from which I've extracted any content on the slide. So if you see those that's actually the reference, so to say. All right, so you can go back to the source and you can look at it if you would like. So this comes from the Brahma Sutra Bhashya. So here, Shankara gives a very beautiful description of liberation. He says that it is about seeing or knowing Brahman. I'll talk about what Brahman is in a while. So what is this seeing or knowing Brahman? So he shares, it is basically seeing Brahman as the supreme reality. Now here the word supreme reality means this is the highest possible reality that is conceivable, right, for a human being. Now, this supreme reality is something that cannot be improved further. That's why it's supreme. That is why it's called paramarthikam. Means that there is nothing more that can be higher than this particular reality. I use the word higher, I'm using the word supreme. All of these are actually words. They tend to give different ideas, but just hold that thought for the moment and let's see what else comes up. The other feature or a point that he makes is that it is eternal and changeless. So this Brahman, which is the supreme reality, the most fundamental, the core and the highest reality, is eternal. Eternal here means that which exists in all three periods of time, which is past, present, and future. And it is changeless, meaning that it doesn't change. It is a changeless being. And then he says that it is all pervasive like space. Now, this has a very big implication. So the state of liberation is all pervasive like space, meaning that it is everywhere. So Brahman is everywhere. There is no place where Brahman doesn't exist. So it is in every part of the universe. That is why the Upanishad also says, Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, meaning Brahman is in everything, everywhere. So the space is used as an illustration to show that all pervasiveness of Brahman. And then it is free from all modifications, meaning that the changelessness is indicated here again, meaning that it doesn't modify, it cannot be altered, it cannot grow as well. All right, that is what this means. And then always contented. This is a very beautiful way to present this. Nitya Triptam, meaning contentment. Here the word contentment, always contented, means this particular being doesn't desire. Now, because desire presupposes duality, meaning I can only desire a thing that is apart from me. So here that word Nitya Triptam, or always contented, means that there is nothing apart from Brahman. Therefore, it is in a permanent state of contentment. There is nothing that Brahman can desire. There is nothing apart from it. So therefore, there is nothing to be desired. Now, the other aspect of always contented mean it is at what I call relaxed. There is no what I call agitation. There is no any kind of chanchala, as they would say. It is there. There is no movement at all. It is always what I call in perfect calm in that sense. And the next one is without parts, meaning that there is no parts within Brahman. It is complete and is homogeneous. So the word here, niravayavam, means homogeneous. It doesn't have parts. Next one, self-effulgent. Self-effulgent means that it is conscious on its own. It doesn't look for something else to light it up. So here the Sanskrit word here, which says Swayam Jyoti Swabhavam, the word Jyoti, which means light, here does not mean the literal light that we talk about. Here the word light signifies sentience. It means that it is conscious and it doesn't have to borrow consciousness. It is consciousness by itself, which is a very, very important word that is used in the tradition to understand Brahman, almost as a synonym, which I'll talk about in a while. So here, it means that self-effulgent means it is self-conscious. It doesn't borrow its light, like the way the moon does. The moon's light is reflected light, right? The sun is the source of light. So here, it is like the sun, not the sun. It is self-effulgent. And it is not subject to dharma or adharma. What does that mean? It means that it is not subject to right or wrong. That's what it means. And it doesn't produce any results. Which means that it is not subject to action. That's what it means. So there is no dharma, meaning ethics, duties, etc. And neither does it have any form of action or karma that produces results in the 3 periods of time. And the last point that Shankara says, it is bodiless, which is ashariratvam, meaning that it is without any body. So therefore, anything that happens to the body does not affect Brahman, or anything that happens to my body or your body does not affect Brahman. This is what it means. Let's go a little further now. What is this Brahman, right? Now that we have looked at the various the descriptors that Shankara has given, what is this consciousness, or what is this Brahman? So here, when we talk about liberation, the liberated state is the knowledge that I am that Brahman. That is what liberation here means. As what I call significant, or even sometimes overwhelming, or even controversial as this may sound, this is what the Advaita Vedanta or the Upanishad tradition, what I call states or teachers, which is I am that Brahman. Now, how do we know this? Know that we are that Brahman? So we find very, very pertinent statements in the Upanishads that actually reveal what does this I am that Brahman mean? And these are called Mahavakyas, or what we call as great statements. Now, why are they great? Because these statements are great because they equate the self to Brahman. So here you see the first Mahavakya, which means consciousness is Brahman. So here we understand Brahman as just consciousness, but this consciousness does not refer to the psychological consciousness, or what we call metacognition, or biological consciousness that is confined to, in medicine, people ask, are you conscious or not? Or we want to know whether the patient is conscious or not. This is not the consciousness we are talking about. In the Upanishad, consciousness is the fundamental reality of the universe, which makes everything evident, which makes everything possible. That is what this particular consciousness means. So therefore, this is not brain consciousness, this is not mind consciousness, though brain consciousness, mind consciousness, or any type of consciousness depend on this particular Brahman, which is absolute consciousness. Another mantra, or another statement that we find in the Upanishad is called Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. The word Jnanam in this particular statement also refers to consciousness. Now, this consciousness is Brahman, is what this great statement says. The second statement says the self is Brahman. So now you can see a very unique, what I call, implication. If consciousness is Brahman and the self is Brahman, then the self is consciousness, isn't it? Right? So now the self is consciousness. So now we know the self of all individuals, even not just human beings, the self of all actually. because in the tradition that is called Sarvantaryami, that means it is in every being, everything, it is there in the as an inner being. So this self is now Brahman. Now, again, the Upanishad says that that Brahman, which is the self, is you, that you are, which is famous Mahavakya, the great statement, which is Tattvam Asi, which is that you are. What is that? That refers to that Brahman, which is consciousness, which is the self, which is you. Now, this word you, which is very powerful, because when you hear a statement like you are Brahman or Tattvam Asi, there is a significant impact, because you are now listening. The power of listening is something that is very, very much investigated in the Vedanta tradition. So that you are, the word you is, this pronoun is very powerful, because it indicates that you are that Brahman, which is consciousness, which is the self. And then the last one, which is the Anubhava, means that experiential statement in the Upanishad, which is I am Brahman, another famous Mahavakya, which is Aham Brahmasmi. So you can see now that the Sadhana Panchakam is teaching liberation, and that liberation is in knowing that I am Brahman. That is what it does, and there is a method of unfolding this. Now, with that, now let's look at what is this particular consciousness that we talk about. So we saw all of these, what I call descriptors earlier that Shankara gave. So now consciousness is all of these. Now that we have seen the Mahavakya, the great statements that show that consciousness is Brahman and the self is Brahman, now consciousness is the supreme reality, eternal, changeless, all-pervasive, like space, etc. Now you can replace the word consciousness with the word self, or you can say I. So in the state of liberation now, I see myself as the supreme reality, eternal and changeless, all-pervasive like space, free from all modifications, etc. This is the state of liberation. And a person gets liberated, that person or that individual is called a Jivan Mukta or Mukta. So what are the outcomes, or what is the result of liberation? So one of the most popular positions taken in the Vedic tradition is that liberation means liberating yourself from the cycle of births and deaths. That's the most popular, what we call as a definition of liberation. So liberation destroys rebirth. But to be honest, rebirth is something that in the Vedic tradition is taken as something that can be viewed as creating suffering and sorrow. So not for all, not everyone would experience rebirth to be something sorrowful. Only a few of what I call some rare individuals or very small population that would actually found rebirth to be a problem. And the moment we find rebirth to be a problem, what it indicates is something else deeper than rebirth. So when we look at liberation, the real purpose of liberation, though we know from the tradition that it is to destroy rebirth, but there are more things that can be unpacked from the word rebirth. The first one is sorrow. So actually, what does rebirth here mean? Rebirth implicitly means that I am in sorrow. I find that living, or whatever that I am doing, action results, and then eventually after the body falls, another birth, all of that actually creates sorrow for me. Or the next experience an individual may have is suffering. They feel that they are suffering. There could be afflictions, and that could create suffering. Then there is this feeling that I am not happy. And along with that, there is another feeling, self-inadequacy. To me, self-inadequacy is very powerful, because many of us, either we are conscious or we're not conscious about this self-inadequacy. Now, the reason why we find the need to improve ourselves, the reason we feel that we need to improve ourselves itself means that we feel that we are inadequate. Therefore, we think that by doing something, we can become adequate. So again, destruction of rebirth also means the destruction of self-inadequacy. And then lastly, it can also be the destruction of existential crisis. In psychology, many of you may know or may not know that existential crisis can refer to anxiety, can refer to depression, it can refer to chronic unhappiness, and all of that. So the liberation that destroys rebirth in the process also destroys existential crisis. While rebirth is something that we cannot see, it happens, after the fall of the body. However, sorrow, suffering, self-inadequacy, and existential crisis are something that we experience in the here and now. So the value that liberation creates for an individual is that it removes sorrow, it removes suffering, it removes self-inadequacy, and finally also removes or destroys existential crisis. Now, with that, the next question, how is liberation achieved? Let's look at what the Upanishad states. Here, the Shvetashvatara Upanishad states, as long as the self does not know the Lord, Brahman. So here you can replace the word with consciousness. Now that we know that we are, at least in this presentation, I'm using the word consciousness. So I can replace the word easily now, because you would understand. As long as the self does not know the consciousness, it gets attached to worldly pleasures and is bound. But when it knows him, or rather knows consciousness, all fetters fall away from it. So here you can see the concept of liberation. How is it achieved? Is achieved through the knowledge of Brahman, or the knowledge of consciousness being Brahman. So what is the primary means in the Upanishad tradition, in as per Advaita Vedanta? It is through knowledge. So now, how is this knowledge gotten? How do I gain this knowledge? Could be the next question. Let's answer that. So what is the means to liberation? Here, the Upanishad gives us a very beautiful model. Now, this model is actually a structure of attaining knowledge or gaining knowledge so that I can liberate myself. And this structure or a model has actually a threefold model. It has three elements. The first one is called Shravana. Shravana literally means listening. Now, here listening is not, although literally it means listening, but what the meaning here is listening to the knowledge of, like the Mahavakya. We saw that earlier, right? Prajnanam Brahma, consciousness is Brahman. And then we saw that eventually we see that I see myself as that consciousness or that Brahman. So this particular teachings of the Upanishads is actually being listened to from a teacher, especially what we call as a traditional teacher or a sampradaya teacher. A sampradaya teacher is a teacher who is trained properly to teach this properly. All right, so they are also trained properly, and they also teach in a particular manner. That is what I mean by properly, meaning that there is a methodology that involves. So the first step for the person who wants liberation is listening to this teaching from a qualified or a traditional teacher who knows the traditional method. So that is called listening. Then the second one, which depends on the first, right, which is called manana. Manana is reasoning on what you are listening. So whatever that you're listening from the teacher about the self being Brahman, self being consciousness, however, we may have doubts, or there could be mental blocks, or there could be other barriers that are in the way of me seeing it very clearly or seeing myself as Brahman. So what is required is reasoning. That is called manana. So the reasoning is also employed in the means to gaining knowledge. Sometimes the teacher himself or herself would give the reasoning, would employ the reasoning. Sometimes the Shastra or the text would also employ the reasoning, how to get there. This is a second element in the means to liberation. The third element is called Nididhyasana, which is called embodiment. So now that I've listened and then I've reasoned, the third part is embodying it. What is embodying it? Embodying it means that you assimilate this knowledge. That means it completely transforms your whole, what I call all the aspects of yourself, your body, your mind, etc. So you feel that your behavior, your word, thought, and deeds, all of them are aligned. That is called embodiment. So when I or you see ourselves as Brahman, what happens is when we embody, that means whatever we say, whatever we do, and whatever we think, they are all embodied, basically based on the knowledge that we have listened. It's very important to see that reasoning and embodiment depend on listening. That is why it is very important to recognize that listening or Shravana is the most important one, because without listening, reasoning and embodiment cannot happen. That's why you can see the arrows here. So that's why in the tradition, Shravana is called Angi, and then Manana and Nididhyasana are called Anga. Angi means the beholder, the one that holds, and the other one is secondary aspects or limbs of the Shravana. This is the means to liberation. So when these three become effective, right? If these three become effective, when embodiment happens as well, then liberation happens. This liberation happens in the here and now. So when the person attains liberation, the person doesn't go anywhere. The person stays here right now and lives just like any one of us. The only difference being that this person is free while living. The person is not bound. The person is not in sorrow. The person is not suffering. The person is permanently free. That's what happens. Now, with that, now we're going to go back to now the Sadhana Panchakam, because the Sadhana Panchakam is teaching this particular knowledge that liberates an individual. However, here is a very important question that I'm going to answer. There are so many texts that Adi Shankara has written. And when you write a new text, usually that new text has to meet a particular need. Otherwise, why am I writing? Why would I want to repeat a topic? Why would I want to repeat the same content? Because repetition is not helpful. If I want to write a text, it must solve a unique problem. It must address a very unique problem. So let's look at what is it that Sadhana Panchakam does. And I'm also going to, when I answer this question, I'm also going to look at the problem in a contemporary way, right? Adi Shankara lived like 1,200 or 1,300 years ago. But what makes this text still relevant? Let's look at that now. So in my experience, or in my view, one of the things that Sadhana Panchakam helps is that it addresses practical problems faced by seekers of liberation. When I use the word seekers of liberation, here I'm talking people who want to liberate themselves. They attend a lot of talks by Swamijis, Swaminis, and etc. They read books, they go to satsanga, they meditate, etc. But they still face challenges. Sadhana Panchakam could potentially help that. And one thing that we need to recognize is the changing landscape of seekers. What does that mean? If you were to notice that these days in Vedanta classes or sessions, almost 99% of the people who are sitting in these classes are not sannyasis. By using the word sannyasis, I'm referring to renunciates, monks or nuns. All right, so renunciates are probably a better word, renunciate, meaning that they've renounced life. And traditionally, Vedanta was meant for renunciates, sannyasis. It was not meant for people like maybe myself, who is not a sannyasi, right? Like people like me were not the target audience. Shankara makes that very clear in his commentary. He says that the traditionally Vedanta is for sannyasis, renunciates. But today, if you look at Vedanta classes, or people who study Bhagavad Gita, people who study Upanishads, or all the fundamental Vedanta texts, like Prakarana Granthas, all of that, most of them are not sannyasis. So the landscape of seekers has changed. So that then we need to address a new set of problems, because the people who are attending these classes may have families, may have siblings, may have parents, they have relationships, they have active relationships, or even if they may not have an extended, family of family members, rather, they still may be working, having employers, colleagues, all of them are part of their, all are also part of the relationships that they may have. So the landscape is changing. So that is one big challenge. The landscape has changed, but the text was traditionally written for the sannyasi. So anyone who teaches this text has to bear this in mind, that he or she is writing for seekers who may not be sannyasis, though the texts were written for sannyasis traditionally. Second challenge seekers face: not experiencing results after seeking. You are listening to the teacher, you are reading the text, but you're not seeing results, right? There's no change. There is no tangible or observable change. That could be another problem. Another problem is challenges of intellectual understanding. Sometimes we find that what Vedanta is teaching, what the Upanishads or what Bhagavad Gita is teaching, is very difficult to understand. That is intellectual understanding, a challenge in that area. Fourth challenge is people find it difficult to integrate the teachings into daily life, because previously, in the early times, the seeker is a sannyasi, so he learns or she learns They go back and they sit alone and they meditate, or they reflect, or they inquire into the knowledge. They don't have to feed the children. They don't have to take care of their parents. They don't have to deal with their spouses, etc. But today it's different. After you attend a Vedanta class for 2 hours, maybe the next class is 1 week later, and from this class till the next one, this session till the next one, you have to face your children, face your siblings, and when you go home, in the class, you hear from the teacher that, what, the self is perfectly tranquil. And then when you go home, you realize that you are quite the opposite. All right. So you realize that you become angry, you have a meltdown, you scold people, maybe you spank your kids, whatever, so all of that could be there. Right. So what does this show? You find that though I'm seeking liberation, but I'm unable to integrate these teachings into daily life. So you can see that gap, right? I know, but I can't do. The knower-doer conflict, as they would call as cognitive dissonance. That is a big challenge. And I've noticed that in my own life, as well as the people that I've taught, as well as learned together with, I've witnessed that as well, right? Integrating is very difficult. It's easy to talk about compassion, but it's very difficult to be compassionate. It is easy to talk about kindness, but it's very difficult to be kind. So this is what I'm by integrating teachings into daily life. Next is emotional readiness and maturity. So sometimes people are not emotionally ready. That means people are very much overwhelmed by their emotional experience. Now, when people are emotionally bound, or when they are overwhelmed by emotions, that particular what I call attitude makes it, rather disposition, makes it very difficult to assimilate or embody the knowledge that self is consciousness of Brahman. So that's why emotional readiness is very important. Therefore, emotional maturity is required, which is a certain degree of mastery over emotions. Not that there are no emotions, but I'm able to manage and deal with the emotions, regardless of whether they come up or they don't. And then lastly, seekers face this challenge, not knowing where and what to work on to see progress. Sometimes you've been listening for 10 years, 13 years, and then you realize you're not going anywhere. What can you do? This is where the Sadhana Panchakam comes. The Sadhana Panchakam is very, very useful for this reason. And I'm going to talk about that in a while. But before I get there, what is the primary problem that the Sadhana Panchakam is dealing? Actually, it is ignorance. The primary problem is ignorance. What is this ignorance? Ignorance about the self, ignorance about Brahman, ignorance of consciousness. This ignorance, or spiritual ignorance, is the problem for my suffering. So if I'm suffering, if I'm in sorrow, if I'm in existential crisis, etc., then what is the cause? The cause is ignorance. And Shankara, in his commentaries, has given a very, very easy way to understand ignorance. He gives three features of ignorance, or three aspects. The first one being the absence of knowledge, he says. He says, one of the reasons why we are suffering because of ignorance is because we don't have knowledge, the absence of knowledge. What kind of knowledge? The knowledge that I am Brahman, I am consciousness, that is absent. That is the first thing that he mentions. The second thing he mentions is we may have doubts. Doubts can also be in the way of actually in the way of being liberated. What kind of doubts? I don't know who I am. I don't know what is the nature of the world. I don't know what is the nature of the objects or the parts of the universe, etc. So these doubts can also be in the way. Then the last thing that he says is contrariety, which is basically means that the cognitive dissonance that I spoke about, which is I know that I am Brahman, but my body, basically my thought, word, and deeds, right, as the self, they don't align, they don't echo, they don't embody this knowledge. That is called contrariety. So Shankara uses the word for absence of knowledge. He says jnana abhava. For doubts, he says it's samshaya, and contrariety, he says viparita or viparyaya. He says you can see in three different places he presents these three ways or three aspects of ignorance. So if I want to get liberated, that knowledge must destroy all these three, isn't it? If it doesn't destroy these three aspects, then I cannot destroy ignorance and become liberated. So this is where Sadhana Panchakam comes here. Now, the uniqueness of Sadhana Panchakam is that it actually provides sadhanas to actually plug all of these three aspects. It provides 5 sadhanas to gain knowledge. The absence of knowledge, now I need to gain. So 5 sadhanas are prescribed for gaining knowledge. And then 4 sadhanas are prescribed to remove doubts. How to remove doubts, rather. How can you remove your doubts, he tells us. And then this is the beautiful part. It gives 20 sadhanas. Can you believe that? 20 sadhanas for contrariety. So what does that mean? The very fact that 20 sadhanas is half of the 40. That means half of the Sadhana Panchakam is actually trying to help the sadhaka, the seeker, to overcome contrariety, which is the opposing feelings that a person suffers from, which is what I call as dissonance. I know, but I don't behave in that manner. So therefore, you can automatically infer that perhaps this is the biggest challenge for seekers. And Sadhana Panchakam gives what I call, it prescribes sadhanas to overcome this. So now let's connect the dots. So the 5 sadhanas that allows a person to gain knowledge is done through Shravana. I mentioned this earlier. So this is where you can see now that the Sadhana Panchakam tells that Shravana is basically for gaining that knowledge, which is listening to the teaching from a teacher. 5 sadhanas are prescribed there. And then Manana is the one that resolves doubts, which is 4 sadhanas. There are 4 sadhanas in the Sadhana Panchakam. And then for embodying the knowledge, which is the Nididhyasana, there are 20 sadhanas. So you can see now that Sadhana Panchakam actually presents that particular means to liberation. Basically, Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, which is listening, resolving the doubts or reasoning, and then embodying the knowledge. That's what it does. However, you would have seen something by now, which is when you add 24 and 5, you get 29, isn't it? So what are the remaining 11 sadhanas? You may be now wondering, where did the 11 go? Now, this is another great feature of the Sadhana Panchakam. What it does is, before you even start Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana, the Sadhana Panchakam says that you need to prepare yourself. Because if you don't prepare yourself, even Shravana becomes challenging. Many of us may have encountered this. You are listening to the teacher, but I'm distracted. I'm thinking about what's happening at home, or what movie shall I watch on Netflix later? All of that may come up. These are distractions. Now, all of these distractions can be there, even in Shravana when you're listening. So the preparation is very vital. If I'm not prepared, this whole Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana may not be what I call, may not be fruitful when I pursue it. And that's why I see that's why I may recognize lots of problems in the process. So how can a person prepare? So here the Sadhana Panchakam prescribes 11 sadhanas to prepare before you even start Shravana, listening. And these 11 sadhanas is around observance of dharma, ethics, and dharma here means ethics as well as duties, values, etc. It also teaches karma yoga. Karma yoga is a very important discipline, and you find that appearing in the Bhagavad Gita. So this teaching of karma yoga is also in the Sadhana Panchakam. And karma yoga also involves mindfulness and devotion. So mindfulness is, dhyana, dharana, or samatva, as you may know in the Gita, and devotion, which is sometimes called bhakti. So these are also taught in the Sadhana Panchakam. So what this means is that first stage is preparation. After I prepare, then I go to Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. If I don't prepare, and that's when problem begins. So if I've noticed that in my experience, when I meet seekers, they go through many challenges in their path. And one of the things that we see is because they go straight into listening to the teaching. Oh, let me go to a class. Let me listen to the teacher. They forget that preparation is a very key and very vital part of the process. If I'm not prepared and I go to the class, I may find that it is not appealing, or I may not even feel the need for gaining this knowledge. I'm probably there because my friend said this class is very funny. Rather, the teacher is very funny. The class is very fun. It is very enjoyable. So the seeker is now going there seeking something other than liberation. He or she is now going there to have a good time. Vedanta is not for having a good time. Vedanta is very, very clear that the purpose of Vedanta is to attain liberation, mukti, moksha. That is the goal. So if the preparation is not there, we may end up in these sessions expecting something other than what is actually teaching. So this is the first area of challenge. So Sadhana Panchakam is very helpful here because it gives you a very systematic way to actually follow or practice these 11 sadhanas before you even go to listening. Now, next challenge that I've noticed is right here on the contrariety, which happens after you listen to Vedanta classes for a length of time. Now, what happens is, in this kind of challenge appears for people who may be attending Vedanta classes for years. And then they find that though they know the knowledge, though they may not have that many doubts, but they are subject and they're given to anger, given to hatred. They hurt people, they hurt themselves, they are not compassionate, they are not kind. All of these would actually become, these behavioral aspects would still be there. They are not, so-called, they are not been removed. So again, Sadhana Panchakam gives 20 sadhanas, which is half of the text, half of the 40, right? How do we embody this knowledge? And it gives various ways, physical disciplines to mental disciplines, verbal disciplines, in a way so that I can now embody this knowledge. Now, with this, I hope that you have seen the beauty of this particular text by Adi Shankara, which is called the Sadhana Panchakam. And this particular book that I'm sharing here is a commentary that I've written, especially for people who are not sannyasis. So because to make this knowledge relevant for people who are not sannyasis, requires a different way of presenting it without losing the essence. And that's what I've done on this commentary. And I hope that you see the value of this text in your own way and find some relevance in it. With this, I end my presentation of the slide, and I'm going to probably have a chat with Aparnaji.
Excellent talk, very wonderful. We are getting a lot of praise and positive comments. Somebody has asked a question, and I think they asked this when you said that nowadays it is not only sannyasis who attend Vedanta classes, but it is mostly householders. So somebody has asked, are we evolving or are we in a downfall?
So I can you hear me? Just want to check if you can hear me. All right, great.
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. So it is not, we are not going backwards, but I think that if you look at the teachers of the Upanishads, they weren't sannyasis. So all the rishis of the Upanishads, at least most of them, even the famous rishi in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which is Yajnavalkya, there is an episode where he leaves home, right? It seemed to suggest that he is taking up sannyasa or wanting solitude. All right. However, we need to recognize that most of the teachers of the Upanishad, almost all of them, were not sannyasis. I'm not saying that I'm not putting down or trying to devalue the tradition of sannyasa, because this is a sannyasa dharma. That is, the sannyasa tradition is the one that had actually protected and taught this particular Vedantic teaching, tradition, organizing the method of teaching, etc. So, but we see that, yes, back then in the Vedic times, the teachers of the rishis were not sannyasis. And then we have a period of sannyasis protecting and propagating and deepening this traditional wisdom. And then now we see, especially after Swami Vivekananda, we need to recognize this. After Swami Vivekananda, we see a great renaissance where people like you and I, who are not sannyasis, seeing the relevance of this knowledge. And we are seeing that actually even people like you and I, who are not sannyasis, maybe brahmacharis or grahasthas, meaning householders and probably unmarried seekers, we too can benefit from it, because suffering cannot be entirely someone who has taken up sannyasa. Suffering is universal. And we also see traditionally a license to this. We see that in the medieval text, a text called Jivan Mukti Viveka. In the Jivan Mukti Viveka, the author, who is Vidyaranya Swami, he makes a very important point. He says even people who are not sannyasis, with the appropriate attitudes and disciplines, can also seek this particular knowledge. So you can see, though after Swami Vivekananda, there's a great, what I call rise in the interest in this knowledge and also scholarship. But even 800 years ago, you see a very famous and a very reputable acharya actually saying that, you know what, even householders and people who are not sannyasis can seek this knowledge with the right attitude and discipline. So I don't think in any way that this is going to be a problem. However, we need to be mindful that these texts were written for sannyasis. Therefore, the teacher has to be very sensitive and would need to perhaps interpret and teach in a way that becomes then such that the knowledge becomes relevant for people who are not sannyasis. I hope that answers the question.
Kathirasan ji, you're a musician and a singer at Rudra.
Yes,
So
I am.
there's, oh, that's amazing because I had been seeing on some one of the platforms of social media recently, and they were suggesting you as a friend. And somebody, Rahul, writes, I never knew that Kathir from Rudra is an author too. Well, I knew him as a great metal musician of Rudra, and now I know that I found him here. It's great to know the other side of you, sir. Um, would you tell us a little about the other side now that we know the Vedanti, Kathirasan?
Thank you for that question, though I don't see it as the other side, but another aspect of myself. So as a musician, I use art and music as a way to contemplate what I've learned, what I value, and what I reflect in in Advaita Vedanta. So that goes out in my as a musician as well. So this also is probably a demonstration of how knowledge can be expressed through arts. We already see that in traditional art forms, but in my case, I do it through rock music. That's a difference, yeah.
Uh-huh. That's really wonderful. We don't have any more questions. Would you like to give some concluding comments?
I would nothing comes to my mind at this point, but what would be very valuable is when a person um, is interested in Vedanta, it is very important to ask the question, why and what do I want out of it? I think these are very important questions, because sometimes we may be looking for something other than what Vedanta can offer. I would always say, right, you may have a headache, but if you go to Vedanta with a headache, it will remove your head. That's the way in which what I call Vedanta approaches a problem. It removes the very notion that you have a problem. So if you have a headache, yeah, take paracetamol. So we need to be very clear why we are coming to Vedanta. Vedanta is an existential pursuit where I realize that I want to solve the problem of the very existence of the self, the world, God, etc., whatever that you may call. Now that is where you come. So you cannot we cannot come to Vedanta with an expectation that it's going to solve my trivial issues. No, Vedanta's goal is to remove the very notion that you are a samsari, that I am bound, I'm in bondage. That very notion is taken away, and it reveals that you are that very consciousness, and that consciousness is not apart from the universe. From one standpoint, you are that universe. That is what it teaches, and that clarity has to be there, and that desire and also clear intention would also have to be there. And when it is there, Vedanta does wonders. It really gives you that thing, that goal that you are searching for, and that particular nectar, that we are all looking for. That is the clarity that is required. So ask, why am I seeking, and what do I want? And that would actually allow us to align everything that we do, from the time we wake up in the morning to the time we go to bed, and everything, be it your work, be it your seva, be it your family, be it your friendship. Even if you're going out to have a cup of coffee with a friend, it becomes purposeful. I think that is very, very critical in trying to understand the self. That
So
is what
that
people like saying, yeah.
and that has given me a question. You said that ask yourself, what is it that I want? it seems that reading the Sadhana Panchakam, or reading your book, or reading about Vedanta, the theoretical side, you need a lot of motivation to continue. For a person like me, I follow the tradition of Ramana Maharishi and his lineage of teachers. I have followed, and I came across the experience much before I came across the word Vedant, Advait. So it is more experiential, and I may say I'm a sucker for experience. How do you, how do, how does a person who seeks experience motivate himself? One, and two, how does he benefit from books like this, or scriptures for that matter?
If there is already an experience, and that experience is corroborated by the tradition, then the purpose of learning a text like this is to give the vocabulary and to also give light to the methodology so that you can transmit the knowledge. So though I experience something, that doesn't mean that I'm an effective transmitter. They're two different things, because teaching is a method. What experience, you gaining that experience sometimes can be due to so many other factors that is even beyond your current life, right? As you know, the tradition says sometimes you bring, some merit from previous lives, past lives maybe, and that accelerates the process of you assimilating or having this atma anubhava, this experience of the self that can happen. But because I have short circuited the process and gotten this experience, I may not be very clear. I'm saying may, not that you are not or anyone is not, may. I may not be aware of the methodology.
I'm
So,
not I'm not established in that experience. I can't bring it back at will.
yeah, that's a good point. So, therefore, this text in the tradition, in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, allows us to appreciate through vocabulary, through methodology, through models, they call it nyayas, etc., to actually anchor ourselves in the self, as well as also effectively transmit it, to teach it. Because teaching this knowledge itself it requires a certain exposure to methodology, prakriyas. There are many important prakriyas in the Vedanta tradition that are used to teach this. So even people who have that experience now can use this as a way to wrap their experience around, constructs, models, etc. It can benefit them as well.
That is so amazing to hear. Like you said, there are prakriyas, there are these, and when I read a part of the book or the Sadhana Panchakam, it says very clearly. It gives the 40 steps. Read the Vedas daily. Do this. Do this. Something very practical. And all these years, I had no idea that in Hinduism we have this, because I'm a great admirer of Tibetan Buddhism, because they have documented everything, every step, every thought that will arise at which stage, everything is documented. So I didn't know that here also it is documented, but it is just not widespread. So we need many more books from you, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for saying that, Aparnaji, because that's one of the reasons why I decided to write a commentary. Because a lot of commentaries there are not many commentaries to start with. The commentaries that are available are very small, very short commentaries. So, and that too, again, as I said, it is for a seasoned seeker. So I was writing to someone who is perhaps starting, or who wants to, see this from the perspective of where they are, either as a householder or maybe a bachelor or person who's not married, and not a sannyasi. That was the audience that I was writing for, actually.
Very, very wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, all you people, for joining on a weekend. Wonderful talk, Kathirasan Ji. We look forward to more.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, namaste.